Where are
Thanks.
you located right now in LA?
Yes, correct.
Great. How's the weather there?
A little bit gloomy today, but that's okay. We'll take some gloom. There hasn't we haven't had any crazy rain for a while, but it's been a good, interesting winter. So,
Well, that's
and
good.
you're in Toronto,
Yeah. We're just
one of my favorite towns. I had the opportunity to work there many years ago, and just love the people, love the town, and so good on you. Good place.
yeah, it is. When was that and what project was that?
Oh my gosh, it was so long ago. It was I don't know if you remember the Billy Jack movies with Tom Laughlin.
Oh,
They're sort of 70s counterculture, and he
okay.
was martial arts guy who beat up the rednecks who were beating up on the hippies, kind of a thing. He intended to do a sequel that took place in the city. It was written for New York, but shot in Toronto. But it ended up not coming to fruition. But we were there. I was there. We shot like the first 4 weeks or whatever, and then it ended up shutting down. But for the time I was there, it was a very lovely stay and just lovely people.
Yeah, it is a great city. It's really nice, uh different things, right? It has a New York feel, but it doesn't, so good to
Yeah,
be here. Yeah.
cleaner
Um
version of New York.
it's not as crazy as New York, but at the same time, it's the craziest city in Canada. Let's just put it that way.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's a city,
Yeah.
city.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, no, thanks so much for joining. I mean, as you probably have heard this millions of times, there's so many people out there who love the Home Alone films, and obviously you worked, I think, with Chris Columbus quite often, like on 9 Months and Mrs.
Hmm.
Doubtfire, and just one thing that I probably picked up 15 years ago. I mean, you watch Home Alone, like literally, it's not like a traditional tradition per se that you watch it every Christmas, like we make time, but we
Right.
always end up watching it anyways. Like whether
Right.
it's at my home or my parents, where everybody gets together, you watch Home Alone 1 and 2.
Right.
But one thing that I picked up on 15 years ago, which I didn't appreciate, because when I started editing myself, is that a lot of people compliment the film's performances, direction, script, music, as they should. But comedy is all about timing, right? And a lot of credit has to go into the editing of the way it was all tightly knit up together. And it's not an easy thing to do that. And maybe that's one of the reasons I never noticed it, is because it was just done so well that you don't
Yeah,
pick
let's
up on
good
it.
editing should be invisible for sure.
Yeah. But just wanted to give you, kudos on such a
No, I
fabulous.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was super fun to do. Chris and I had done we'd done I'd worked on Adventures in Babysitting as like
Yes.
a second editor that sort of helped put together a scene. And then he asked me to do Harper's Hotel, which we did, which didn't work too well. So I think both of us were thinking, well, career done, what are we going to do now? And then he got Home Alone after meeting with John Hughes. And yeah, it's just a delightful movie that it's like one of those things that everything worked. Like the best movies that I've worked on, Pretty Woman, Good Morning Vietnam, as an editor, uh, they just sort of they came together and they worked immediately. So great concept, great performances, beautifully executed by Chris, and so the editing of it. I appreciate the compliment on the timing, and I think that it wasn't something that I studied or went in thinking, oh, it's going to be this or it's going to be that. I just sort of went with my gut, but my gut, it turns out, had been through osmosis, had been trained by Looney Tunes and Roadrunner, and so when I saw these sort of sequences, in their raw dailies form and started to put them together, I think that timing was somewhere in the back of my head, and it just made it onto the screen.
Yeah, no, phenomenal, absolutely. And going back to your beginning of your career, how did it all started? Like what got you into the world of film and then obviously editing? If you can share that story.
Yeah, well, I was very lucky because I had a father who was in the business, so nepo baby, I guess is the new term. But I was able to start as they used to call them gophers, they call them PAs now, but is basically a runner at Robert Altman's film company. And at the time, they were doing his movie A Wedding. And so my job was to be at the LAX airport at 3 a.m. to receive all the raw negative that was coming in and drive it to the lab, have that there in the morning, and then I would go in and I'd work in the editing room and just like do whatever I do, do runs for the office or whatever. But I was immediately fascinated with the editing aspect of it. And the guys were there working, and they were working on big flatbed chem machines. So it was a very observable art form. You could sort of be quietly in the back of the room and say, "Oh yeah, he's trying to get from that shot to that shot, and he's trying to match this." And this, like, I could understand intuitively what the goals were and what they were trying to accomplish. And sometimes thought I could do it better. You know what I mean? So I was a 18-year-old kid, so that was sort of the earliest days. And then I did a few films in a row with Altman and that same team of editors, and eventually became, I guess, a second editor, co-editor, whatever, of his movie Popeye. And
Oh, you did Popeye. Okay.
yeah. So I wasn't the main editor. I was one of a big team. But that's how I worked my way basically from being the guy that drives her out to get coffee to being an editor on that. So it was great. Like it was like the perfect lab, I guess, slash school, university, however you would call it. But basically there was no studio structure. There was no union rules. At the time, like certain things, you had to be of a certain union status to like load a machine or to do this. It was very sort of regimented, and you had to be an apprentice editor for 5 years before you could be an assistant editor, before you could be an editor and whatever. But that existed in the Robert Altman universe. So like, 2 months in, I was like threading the projectors. It's like, hey, get out of here. There's a screen. You got to thread the projector. Okay. So now I'm running the projection room, and you got to learn to do this. You got to do that. So pretty much everything that they could throw at me, I gobbled up, and was fortunate enough to leave there with quite a great post-production education. So it was pretty miraculous time, and just a fun place to work, and I learned a lot.
Fantastic. And when you're editing any kind of project, like mostly, I mean, from what your filmography I've seen, especially in the 90s and the 80s, they're more or less comedies that you did. And when you get onto a project, no matter what kind of project it is, what genre it is, whatever, like how early do you get involved, or is it literally like, as depending on the project, if the dailies are coming in as they're being shot, do you start editing simultaneously because of maybe budget or time strain?
Yeah, definitely. That's pretty much how it goes on every movie. I would usually, if I worked with a filmmaker before, say Chris Columbus, he'd say, "Hey, we're doing this movie. You want to do it?" And I'd say, "Yes, of course." And they'd send me a script, and I'd sort of know the script. If it was a filmmaker I hadn't worked with, they'd send me the script, and I'd have to go in to do the interview and like say smart things about the script and the process. But in terms of like the actual production process, yeah, we basically set up shop a week before shooting, just so that the editing room was fully operational. Oftentimes we'd be on location. Like Home Alone was filmed in an abandoned high school, New Trier High School,
Yeah.
in Northbrook, Illinois. And basically the gymnasiums were sound stages, and we were like in the basement down in the music room. And so you're on location, so you need to sort of get set up and get the equipment there, and so that, yeah, day one, when the dailies hit, you're ready to fly. And basically dailies hit at 8 a.m, and you're have to have them all sunk up because the picture and sound is separate, and you get these little pieces of paper that say what it is, and you hear the clapper, like all those processes that we used to have to do with film.
Yeah.
To sync them up in these big rolls. And so basically the morning in every editing room was absolute chaos, because there was like film flying everywhere, and you couldn't find this, and this was out of sync or whatever. So then the whole crew would come in at lunchtime and watch dailies and eat lunch, and then they go on. So it was really a nice, you got like instant reaction. As I was seeing the dailies, the entire crew was seeing the dailies, and I sort of hear where the laughs were, and sometimes they were like weird laughs, like, oh, something must have happened like off camera that, and this moment reminded everybody of it. But sometimes they're actually, legitimate laughs. So first time seeing dailies, you actually had a pretty sizable audience, and even though you're seeing it over and over again. So that was it was a really good experience that just doesn't happen anymore. Like, everyone watches dailies on streaming sites and like that. So you don't have that sort of big room experience in today's filmmaking. But it was pretty special. It was a lot of pressure to get it done, but it was also very unique and very educational.
And how much work, like after the production was done, you were on the set doing dailies and all that stuff. After everything was wrapped up, how many months of work did you have to do to obviously get it to the final cut?
I would say not that much. Generally, DGA, there's a DGA rule where the director has 10 weeks before they present their director's cut. So Chris would usually take 2 weeks off after shooting, and I would show him my editor's cut when he'd come back, which was great. It was great to have that much time to sort of, figure it all out, add some music, really try and balance things. And he trusted me enough to give me the 2 weeks he gave me came off his director's cut time. So, but yeah, we generally were in really good shape by director's cut. We had things working, we had it honed, then you show it to the studio, and then you have some sneak previews. So in the case of Home Alone, they scheduled a preview in the suburbs of Chicago, because that's where John was based, and he really trusted those audiences, and he trusted his gut in that part of the world. And then you start to do the final sound mix. So I'd say all in, from the time we wrapped, probably 6 months, maybe 8 months, something like that.
And where did the music come into play? At what stage? John Williams' score?
Generally, films are scored when they're in final cut. And we didn't. Sometimes, people will have the composer from the jump. Like, if I worked with Heitor Pereira on a few movies, and it's like, we're doing this movie. Heitor, are you in? Yeah. So I knew who the composer was, and he might come to some screenings or whatever, but no one really starts writing until the movie's in a final cut, because they don't want to rewrite and all that stuff. So in the case of Home Alone, we didn't have a composer, and the movie screened great. Chris actually did a lot of the musical research on that. He'd say, try this for here, try this for there. And so he put in the Tchaikovsky music. We tempt it with a lot of, what you would consider Christmassy things, but most specifically a lot of Nutcracker. And the movie screened great. And it's like, okay, well, we need a composer. Who are we going to get? And the studio, to their credit, Chris said, do we have a shot at John Williams? I mean, this guy was a god of composers, and he'd done like everything already, that you could possibly do. He writes the most memorable themes. You or I could hum come
Oh
a couple
yeah.
bars of Jurassic Park or E.T. or whatever, and you know that movie, and that's just so unusual in the film universe. But so yeah, so it was like the it was the huge ask, and some calls were made and said maybe it's not a no. Um, and so John screened the movie for himself in LA, and I think just really attached on to the Tchaikovsky of it all. He appreciated that, and he was directing the Boston Pops at the time, and they always had
Mm.
a Christmas show, which he always loved. And so I think the combination of those two things and just the charm of the piece and of little Macaulay Culkin, whatever it all was, he said yes, and so yeah. So then the music got scored. We finished the mix, and it was out. I guess I don't know, probably 4 weeks later.
Yeah. The great thing about that music is, to me, that's Christmas music. Like, you can play that music and you can feel it snowing outside. That's how incredible that music is.
Yeah,
Even if
I
you
mean, it
can't.
was the music. The movie was a 9 before John got involved, and it was an 11 after. I mean,
Yeah,
it was like everything worked, everything was great, but the magic fairy dust that he sprinkled through just made it. I think it made it the Christmas classic that it is.
100%. And you obviously made a transition from film to Avid or digital. Um,
Right.
you know, uh, Obviously I haven't done anything similar to your caliber, but I have gone from 16 millimeter and cutting them on flatbed to
Yeah.
Final Cut to Premiere to Avid.
Sure.
And in that industry at that time when that transition was taking place, because you're talking about films that are millions of dollars of budget, how was that transition like, making that from film to digital?
It was. It was a lot, but it happened kind of at a perfect time for me. I was aware that this technology was out there. I hadn't done hands-on, but I'd done a lot of research. And Chris was getting ready to do Mrs. Doubtfire. And I approached him and said, hey, Chris, there's these digital editing systems. I think that, there's going to be a lot of takes with Robin, and it allows us to sort of go through a lot of material quickly, and, just sort of all the pitch. I'd never worked on it, but that was sort of the pitch.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, sure. If that's what you want to do, let's do it. So it was, instead of like it being sort of forced upon me, I was sort of out there researching it and going towards it, because you want to be current, and if someone says that there's a great new toy, you want to fly that machine. So we did. It was hard. It was hard just because storage wasn't nearly what it is today, and
Nothing.
we used a machine called Lightworks. I'm not sure if they're
Yeah.
still around, but there was a company out of England called Lightworks, and between Avid and Lightworks at that time, they're both in their infancy. Lightworks just seemed a little more intuitive to a flatbed editor like myself. You could tell it was designed, like even the motion controller had a chem kind of a feel. So, but yeah, I mean, Chris shot 1,000,000 feet of film on that movie, and so we had. You remember the big computer towers that when you first got your computer, there was that
Oh
big
yeah.
massive tower that was the size of, several bricks. We had, I think, 22 of those full of material, and the machine could only handle 3 at a time. So to go through actually run the movie in the cutting room, we'd have to like stop, reboot, replug, and then go and then play that section, and replug. So, the people at Lightworks were like, what do you mean there's 22 hours full of material? No one had ever seen anything like it. So, yeah, I think it was a little shock and awe on both sides. So it was a great tool to put that together, to go through 25, 30 takes of Robin Williams ad-libbing, and to find those pieces. and to be able to sort of actually consume that much material. And in terms of yeah, but then the output was time consuming. Like to actually go to a mix, I had to sit at a machine with a 35 millimeter recorder, and I hit go on track 1 and wait the 10 minutes that reel was, hit go on track 2, and if there was 12 tracks, that's 12 hours right there just to do one reel, to go to the editing, to go to the mixing stage. Like there wasn't the back and forth that we have now, where here's a file, or I just email it to you. So
Yeah.
we were sort of breaking ground, and so there was a lot of kind of back end unexpected work, but all in all, it was terrific, and it worked out great, and again, I just had a great time doing that movie.
Yeah, to your note about digital and hard drives and all that, I remember I bought a drive. This was like gigantic, this big, right?
Mhm.
It was 30 gigs,
Right.
30 gigabyte, which is like, your phone doesn't even have 30 gigabyte anymore. And it cost me $500 at the time. This was like
Yeah.
when I did my first short film. And now you look at it like, you can buy like super ridiculous
Yeah.
NVMe,
This is 3 terabytes right here. Yeah.
yeah. It's just even your phone has a terabyte now if you wanted to upgrade
Yeah.
that to that.
Yeah.
But
It was definitely a lot of pressure, because I was the one that wanted this machine, and so
so you
every
had
time
to,
I had to like reboot, I could sort of feel Chris over there going. If we wanted to screen the movie straight through, we'd just output it to video, and then we could run it straight through. But even output took some time, because you had to plug and replug all those towers. So it was a learning curve for all of us. But I think that I think we probably broke through we were the icebreaker for people that followed behind us. It's like, oh yeah, okay, we know how to deal with this now. So
yeah. No, it's I wonder sometimes that what's the next leap going to be, right? In the world of, I mean, there's a lot of stuff already happening now with AI and stuff,
yeah,
but as far as post production is concerned, there
yeah.
are some, you know,
I mean, the interesting thing is, because the logical producer thing is, when you say, "Oh, I want this expensive new machine because I can do all this, I can do it, so much quicker." They say, "Well, oh, so you can do the movie in half the time, right?" And you're like,
yeah,
"No, not really." And because once you can do all the bells and whistles, like, oh, add titles and do a whole sound mix. Well, now you got to add titles and do a whole sound mix. Like, you can't, like, no one runs a movie a first cut. No editor runs a first cut without a full score, without titles, without visual effects built in, and so all that stuff takes time too. So
yeah,
this magic machine did not cut the process in half. It the whole Marvel system. I've never worked in it, but I have friends that have, and there's just this whole infrastructure around moving data around, and editors that like mock up all the effects, and it's just because you can do more in a box, you do more in a box, and but you need people to do it, and you need time to do it. So
yeah. No, editing, that's the thing. That's what I was going to say earlier, that even though I think AI may, let's say, supposedly do some stuff, but I still feel there, a job of a director, a job of a writer, filmmaker, editor, all will stay. AI probably will do stuff that is more, for the corporate end of things, like, you know, I think, I actually think it's going to make the value of human beings that are still doing what they're doing go much higher than it already is, because then it's going to become a scarcity, right? And the people who are really good at it and they want to stick into that department, then they should be able to capitalize on. That's just my theory.
yeah, well, that's a very optimistic outlet, and it's nice to hear. I don't know that much about AI as it applies to post production. I know, as with sound mixes, as the boards got computerized, and you didn't have to, like, try and match in and like match the sound with your ear and find the thing. Like, when you went to make a change, it's just like all the knobs go to where they were, and all the EQs go to where they were. And if you need to put in a new piece, you pop it in, you pop it out. So I don't think that's AI. That's electronics.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that certain things will become easier. I can't. It is hard to see how the jump goes, how it jumps into a creative thing in terms of like how the machinations of how everything moves. It's easy to see how AI and computerization helps, but the creative. But I guess like if Chatbox can write a script, I'm probably saying that wrong. Chatbot, whatever, can write a
ChatGPT.
script. It can probably edit a movie. You know.
Well, there are services out there where what they do, I mean, it's nothing complicated as a movie, but if you tell ChatGPT to write a script about, let's say, who's God,
Right.
or and then it writes it, and you take that, and then you take another platform, which will have all these pre-saved individual faces
Mm-hmm.
that can literally read it out for you on AI, and then you can manipulate sounds to whatever you want. And so it's like talking head on in front of like a white background. That's where we are
Wow.
right now with AI. Now this has happened in a matter of months, right? ChatGPT, they debuted
Wow.
about 5, 6 months ago.
Yeah. So you can do a whole
So
table read all virtually.
I guess, I mean, it's mostly designed for like corporate companies, like corporate videos. Like if you want to like a message to the staff, or just like a real estate agent talking about their services or whatever, instead of you going up in front of it, you can just feed into and it takes matter of minutes. Apparently, you have to pay for it, obviously,
Right.
but it take matters of minutes. So,
That's my
but
dream. I'm terrified of public speaking, so if I could send a bot up for me, I'd definitely sign up for that.
I don't know how you're terrified of public speaking. You're speaking extremely articulately and well right now, so I'm not sure
Well, I'm in the comfort
why
of my
that is.
living room. I'm
No,
not at some
still,
corporate table somewhere, you know.
I'm sure you're fine. You're just being humble.
Yes.
But Chris Columbus, I obviously discovered him after Home Alone, like even when I was, how old was I when Home Alone came out? I was like a teenager, like 14, 15 years of age. And that's when my infection, my love for film began, around that time in the early 90s. And I looked him up, and then I found out that he wrote Goonies, he wrote Gremlins. And then you look at his resume, right? Home Alone 2, 9 months, Mrs. Doubtfire. And it's just like Stepmom, like a hit after hit. And that's what I love about his films is, and obviously you were a huge part of his work, in the 90s. They're just so simple, but the core of it, it's all that family thing, right? Like, and that we all resonate to. There's no cultural, color, religion barrier to that. It's just everybody connects to that.
Yeah.
And when you work with him on projects like those, as an individual, not as an editor, what do you feel? Do you have any kind of input as to saying, Chris, this is not going to work with the audience, or this is great? Any example that you remember for any of the films that you worked on with him?
Not so much. I mean, he basically by the time I got involved or even sent a script, it was somewhat locked and loaded. Like this is the movie we're making. It's already cast, and so I wasn't really sort of in the internal brain trust of how he chose the movies he chose, or who do you think we should cast, Raj? Like it wasn't that wasn't. I didn't have a foot in that room. So
No, no, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, when you know how a film is get written three stages: script, production, post-production.
oh yeah,
In
of course.
in post-production, did you have any? Do you remember? I'm sure you did have a lot of input, but do you remember any specific example where the script per se got changed, or scenes got shifted around because of what your intuition told you, or what your gut feeling told you?
No, there was no in the movies you mentioned. There was no like big rebuilding
Really?
process. Like I did a movie. I did the first Scooby Doo movie, which was part of showbiz lore. What that movie went through in terms of rebuilding and restructuring. But no, none of those Chris movies sort of needed any sort of major surgery. So it was. I mean, I made creative decisions every day, like. there's 12 takes. I'm going to use this one.
Yeah.
And, this is how I'm going to structure. I'm going to be in the wide shot here because I think it shows blah, blah, blah. And we go through and talk about that. Like, why are you in this shot here? And, in my head, I saw it over there. It's like, oh, well, this is why. And we go, yeah, right. You're right. You're right. And so we had a very sort of trusting back and forth relationship. I mean, there's a couple. Yeah, I think it was just sort of normal director
Got it.
editor stuff, and like I'd say, we really don't need this scene. It's not advancing the story. It's not particularly funny. So you're right, take it out. So, but that was more like just tightening the film.
Sure.
But he'd say, get rid of this scene, and say, no, let me try and fix that. I have an idea. Like in Mrs. Doubtfire, when Doubtfire's calling the Sally Fields character, pretending to be all the different nannies, the bad nannies. Like it wasn't working. It was kind of laying there. It was kind of dead. And Chris says, let's just take all this stuff out. We don't really need it. Doubtfire can just show up. And I said, no, let me take a crack at it. So I got a piece of Vivaldi, Four Seasons, I think, and just basically turned it into a montage, which allowed us to sort of get in for the greatest hits. It's like, new face, new Robin voice, Sally Fields reacts, boom, punchline, next, and so what was a 4-minute scene turned into 30 seconds of fun. So, I would consider that just sort of the normal process of creative interaction. There was no sort of big rebuilds, and just because those movies just worked, the scripts were good.
Yeah.
And the same with Pretty Woman. There was no what Gary shot and what's on the screen. There's nips and tucks and whatever, but it just worked. The probably the most, in terms of the movie that had the most direct impact on as an editor, was 100% Mrs. Doubtfire, because there, literally 30 takes of Robin ad-libbing, and sometimes it would be funny and sometimes it would go dark. And I mean, the amount of choose your own adventures that I could have done with all that material could have been like it could have gone wrong a lot of different ways. Maybe could have gone right in some more interesting ways, but to weed through all that, and like sometimes there were certain jokes that he would come back to once in a while, but sometimes the tee up for that joke would be in, say, take 5, but he sort of muffed the payoff to it, and then the good payoff would be in take 25, but he said the setup in past tense instead of present tense, and so now it's like, oh, these are going to be great. Oh, they'll go together because he set it up in present tense but paid it off in past tense. It doesn't sound right, so I'd have to go through hours of film to find an ED that I could put on the present tense one to make it sound past tense so that the joke works. So just in terms of like granular deep dives to stitch all of that together was probably the most creative input I'd ever had on a movie, just because it required it. And I was a little fortunate because I'd worked on Good Morning Vietnam and done all of the broadcast sequences. So that was basically Robin going off, ad-libbing in front of a mic, and so I had a little bit of experience with Robin ad-libbing, so it prepared me well for Mrs. Doubtfire.
And that must be really fun and challenging at the same time, right? Editing Robin Williams, because he was such a great comedian, but also a great serious actor. That when you're watching him as an editor, or even on the set, you can't help but laugh because of his performance, his physical movement.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the guy would speak in so fast and in so many different tempos that to sometimes edit it, as you said, example that past tense and present tense, it can become challenging.
Yeah, and there'd be big tangents and stuff, and so it's trying to boil it all down into what you see when you watch the movie it was a lot. I mean, it was rewarding because I knew that I was doing it well, and I felt like I was doing it well. And then we went to our first preview, and it killed. It did great, and we found some more laughs along the way. And but yeah, again, basically what you see is pretty close to. It's a tightened version of my first cut, basically. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's nice when movies come out of the box working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Best ones usually do.
Yeah, for sure. And then Home Alone 2, I mean, the way it was written was very similar to the way the first one was, right? Like in terms of beats, in terms of scenes, in terms of
Yeah, I mean
everything.
that's the sequels are hard, because
I know.
you want to deliver what worked the first time, of course, because that's why the audience is coming
Yeah,
back. But you don't want to redo it, so you end up changing the curtains a bit, but leaving the architecture. Um, I guess you could say that's kind of what was done on Home Alone 2. We moved it from Chicago and suburbs to. I shouldn't say
yeah,
we. John. I should say John. John moved it from the Chicago suburbs to New York City, but it was still at its core a kid defending his home
yeah,
from the two same bad guys. And I don't know if he could have. I mean, I don't know how far away from that you could have gotten, because that's what Home Alone is, and it still had, I think, the emotional punch. I think that in my opinion, I think that
for sure.
the the all the traps got maybe a little too aggressive. Again, one needs to feel one tends to want to one up oneself in the sequel, or at least not repeat oneself. So
Yeah,
the slip and fall on ice became bricks from the fourth story. So it was a little bit, just trying to keep that funny, and like find the right sound effect where people weren't going they were actually going oh.
yeah.
So that was a pretty fine balance on those.
I genuinely mean when I say this, among all the films that have been made, let's say since The Godfather, like I'm just gonna cut off from The Godfather. If there are any films that have sequels that come close to the first one, if not better, in my view, it's The Godfather Part 1 and 2, Back to the Future Part 1 and 2, and Home Alone 1 and 2. In most cases, for me, Home Alone 2, we end up watching way more. I think it's because of its city feel, as well as like the stunts that they pulled off, like that brick scene at the end.
Right.
I would love watching it, but I would hate watching it because every time the brick hit his face, I would just like feel like that's just hitting my face. And
So it worked. it
yeah,
had
no, it did.
it had the
It
desired
did.
effect, apparently.
But
I
but
mean, I would say that certainly Empire Strikes Back was a
yeah,
huge so
sure.
there's definitely more than the examples that you laid out, but it is tricky business.
Well, it's those are personal things. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not I love the original Star Wars trilogy. I'm not a Star Wars hardcore fan at the where I've
yeah,
seen
I'm the same way. I can't keep up with
yeah,
all the
everything.
stuff.
But yeah, no, Home Alone 2, was it somewhat easier to edit into when I say easy, I don't mean like time-wise, but because you knew what you were in terms of the tempo, even though the script was, fine and complete.
I
Was
guess
it
so. I guess so, but in a way, it felt harder. I guess because
really
you're comparing yourself against what was
true?
before, and like, is this as good? I don't know. Maybe I should try it 8 different ways and see if I missed something or whatever. So the pressure of the sequel, to match the original, that falls on the editor as well. So as
Yeah.
as you're in the editing room, you're like, oh, I got to make this better somehow. And so I would say it was harder to do. Well, the first one was such a simple story too, and the second one just got more complicated. We had the pigeon lady in the park, and don't forget that Donald Trump cameo.
Yes. Yes.
And we had there's just more moving parts. I suppose is the best way to put it, and sort of to keep the tone. And we didn't have like the old man in the church scene. We kind of had it with the pigeon lady, but Yeah, so yeah, it just I would say generally it was not easier because the first one was this fresh thing that we were doing, and the second one was, oh man, we gotta match this,
Pressure. Yeah.
$300 million grossing little movie that came out of nowhere. So
Yeah. Is it, well, you directed Home Alone 3,
that's
right?
correct. Yeah.
Is it true, I read this somewhere, that originally there was a plan to make Home Alone 3 with Macaulay Culkin, and that didn't transpire because he quit acting? I don't know how accurate this information is,
No,
but I read that.
if that happened behind the scenes between John Hughes and the Macaulay camp. By the time
Mm,
I was involved, it's like new story, new kid, and I guess the reason that I was given was that he'd written he'd written it for a certain age, and he thought that Macaulay's age at this point would be a different story.
mhm.
If it's that it might lack some of the innocence, I guess. A 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid
Yeah,
fending off bad guys is just a different look. Not you couldn't do it, not that you couldn't do it, but it wouldn't really be Home Alone. So I think he basically, like, we're going to figure out about Christmas. We're going to put in these international spy guys, and they're going to need this thing. So he sort of changed up the whole formula. So no, I don't believe that if that Macaulay uh, conversation took place, I wasn't aware of it.
mm. And how did you end up directing Home Alone 3? Because up until that point, you were just editing. Was that like a very organic thing?
It
Or
was
did you?
semi. I mean, I kind of went after it. I saw that they had announced a Home Alone 3 was going to happen.
Hmm,
I knew Chris wasn't going to do it. He was over it. He felt like he'd done it, and he wanted to move on. So I'm sitting there. I was actually editing Romy and Michelle's high school reunion at the time, and I saw this in the trades. And like, oh wow, they're going to need a director. Wonder who they're going to get. Why not me? So I called my agent and said, hey, agent, I just saw this thing. It's like, yeah. So I said, well, maybe pitch me for director. He's like, yeah, why not? And so he did. And John always liked me. I did successful movies for him. So why not? So yeah, next thing I knew, I was on a plane to Chicago. I read the script, and there's a totally different language to directing than editing, by the way. And it's a totally
mhm.
different, like, as an editor, I never had to sit in a corporate boardroom and talk about my vision. My vision was always like, you want my vision? Here, let me show you the movie. That's the vision. So I wasn't great at it. I still, my entire career, I was never great at the boardroom portion of the job. But I think John figured, well, shit, this guy edited, these two things. He probably knows a thing or two about how they go together and how they
Yeah,
work. And he might not be great with actors, but he might. I directed a lot of the looping, the ADR, so I definitely had experience with actors, and we got the same director of photography from the original two. So I think as a package, it felt like, what could go wrong? These
yeah,
the people involved, sans Chris, they would know a thing or two about Home Alone.
yeah. And with that transition that you made, or a jump that you made, um, I know from my personal experience that sometimes directing and editing simultaneously is very rarely a good thing, but more than likely it's not a good thing, because when you're directing, then if you're editing the same thing, you're too close to the project, you're too close to what you have done. But at the same time, transitioning between, and it's so funny you mentioned this boardroom thing. I think you hit the nail in the coffin, because that's something that I didn't realize that was something that I was struggling with,
Mm.
but that's exactly what it is. That when you're directing, you have to do this whole extrovert thing, and when you're editing, it's completely introvert.
Yeah.
So how was that? Like just being jumped on the set and dealing with everybody and actors was a very quick
Oh, that
transition.
that was great. Like for me personally, uh, like having extremely creative people come up to you and saying, "Hey, we're thinking this, we're thinking that. What are you thinking?" Oh yeah, great. Yeah, that's great. So I was extremely comfortable on a movie set. I didn't have uh, all of the proper words. Sometimes I would, I'd call those wires over there, the wrong thing, or the snoot on the light the wrong thing or whatever. But I knew how to create shots, and I knew how to say, I want the camera to start here. I want to slide along with that little car. When the car gets here, I want the camera to stop and then rise up and see the kid. Like I was very good at constructing shots in my head, and so like executing them in the real world. Sometimes there was hiccups where the camera doesn't do that. It doesn't go from there to there. Okay, well, we'll add a cut, and so that movie sets I'm great with. It can be freaking raining down. We're losing the day of shooting. I got to figure out how to do this one day scene in one shot instead. Bring it on. But it's honestly for me, it's the go tell the suits what the vision is and sell the movie. So that's where I feel like there's people that are much better than me at that.
Yeah. But good thing about directing is if you're an editor, because you're already editing in your head as you're shooting. So
Yeah, totally.
you know exactly what you're looking for. You want a coverage here, you want an angle here,
Yeah, yeah,
boom, boom, boom. And
yeah.
it becomes a lot easier in that sense.
The downside I would say is that you also know that I found like I may get in trouble like if I have to like actually lift the whole end of this scene, like how the hell am I going to get out of it? So I'm also thinking about what the bad things that could happen, and so I tend to like shoot myself some trap doors and the like ways that I could get out of a scene earlier or get out of something if I needed to. And it kind of confused the first AD. It's like, you got that fucking scene, didn't you? He was Australian. Uh,
Yeah.
and they say, yeah, I got that. That's good, but I just need this one little piece because just in case, just in case. And so the just in case of it all was the editor working. It was not familiar to the
Yeah.
anyone else I was working with. I should have just probably kept it to myself, but no, but I did use those trapdoors with some regularity. So I was really glad I did them. I still do.
Yeah. And did you find any difference in the art of storytelling from post-production to production?
Can you repeat that? I'm not sure I
Like,
understood.
did you find any difference telling a story in an editing room versus on set, like just through visuals? Because you're dealing with actors, yes, you have an AD and everything, but you're dealing with a
Sure,
complete
sure.
three-dimensional space.
Yeah.
Who's going to be where's all that cutoff and timing. How was that? Was that easy? Was that very organic, or was there any challenges with that?
It wasn't easy, and I think it's a bit organic. I think I can envision three-dimensional spaces and objects moving in three-dimensional spaces pretty well. I guess it's just the way I'm wired. Then I can imagine how the camera might move against those in that three-dimensional space. So, in terms of shot design in my head, but it wasn't easy. I mean, I would spend basically the entire weekend while everyone else was resting. I was like doing homework for the next week, and I'd put out shot lists at the beginning of the week. And so yeah, I'm basically just doing all the brain work. And then once on set, generally it works, unless there's like, and I got better at this as I did more movies, but in my earlier movies, like, yeah, well, this camera will go like this. And then the DP's like, dude, I'm gonna have to light the whole other side of that street. I don't have the lighting package. That's gonna be hours. Like, we're not gonna get it. Okay. So I'll redesign the shot. We're not gonna, I'm not gonna submarine the whole schedule to like make the camera do that. So I had some learning curves on things, and things still happen. I'll design a shot that I think is a steady cam, and
Yeah.
they'll say, it's going to be much better techno crane. Do we have a techno crane? We just happen to have one. Yeah, so, or whatever. So there's, I mean, you're fine tuning up until the last minute, and if a shot's just not going to work and it's going to burn like half your day on this one shot, sometimes you got to punt. You know,
Yeah. And and that's why you have professionals, right? Like because your job is to direct with work with actors, and you have a
yeah,
cinematographer. He or she are supposed to think what's
right.
doable and what's not. And you're so right about because I've run into that trap too, where I'll just assume I've got access to everything. And then
Right.
and then when you tell it to the cinematographer, he's like, "What are you talking about? Like, we don't have this, we don't have that." It's called
Yeah.
wishful.
Okay, we'll do it in a close up. It's a walk and talk. Here we go.
Who
I always complain like they do this on freaking ER all the time. And like, well, they have the whole stage lit, Raj. We're out on a damn street. So yeah. I forget what
and
the I forget what the original question is. I got up on a
no,
tangent
no,
there.
that's okay. We're kind of going bouncing back and forth. My next I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to talk about? Man, I never had questions.
No, you were saying that you have the department heads and they're all very smart, and I'm working with the
Yes,
actor, which is all
yes,
very true. But I learned when I started doing the visual effects movies, the Scoobies and the Smurfs of the world, that to ask a lot of questions, because very smart people will, and you'll have like a storyboard or something for a visual effect or whatever, and very smart people come to you and say, well, that's going to be $750,000, that shot, which obviously who can afford that? So I said, well, why? Oh, well, because you got to da 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 and this and that. No, this layer is this company, that layer is that company. This I got to shoot a helicopter shot. And you're like, whoa! It's just a sketch of mountains, guys. Let's back it off. Let's break it down. And so my point is that in all cases, because your crews made a lot of movies and they're smart people, they come to you with like the first 5 or 6 decisions made, and now they're asking you to make the final decision. Like it's down to this and this.
yeah,
So I had to learn to say, like, if none of those worked early on, I'd say, well, okay, that one, I guess. And then I have this situation where it still wasn't working, or whatever it is. So I learned to ask questions. Well, why does it have to be those two? And they get a little frustrated. Well, because da-da. And they explain how they arrived at the decision they are now presenting me. And usually, if I ask back enough questions, I get to a point where I say, "Oh, well, that assumption that you made on step 1 or 2, forget that because we can just do it this way." And they go, "Oh, well, that's a lot easier." And I'm like, "Yeah." And so it was a skill that I never had before that I had to learn. Sometimes I just say, explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old. Like, let's start absolutely at zero. Why this situation has to be this way, and they roll their eyes and they do it, but it usually led to me understanding the situation. Sometimes there was nothing to do. They were right. Oh, you're right, because we do have to do, and that does have to lead to there. But sometimes they'd made an assumption that didn't need to be true. We could change that assumption, and suddenly that $750,000 shot becomes a $10,000 shot because we're excellent. So that was that was my tangent on the crew and all that. But you're absolutely right. You want everything working 100% smoothly, so that you can focus on your actors and in my case, in some movies, my pretend little actors that were running across keyboards.
yeah. Did you edit Home Alone 3 as well, or?
No, I had great editors. On all my movies, I had great editors. Bruce Green, Malcolm Campbell, Kent Beta, Sabrina Plisco has done all of my later movies. So I still edited. I still had a machine and an Avid. I still had an Avid and an Office. And so generally, like, I sort of compare it to a composer. Like if you're a composer, you can either sit down the keyboard and play, and you get in kind of a flow state, and the music, you find the music. If you're that same composer and you sit in the back of the room and you say, play E, how about a C? Now follow that C with a D E. There's a lack of flow state to it. So
Yeah.
since I came from editing, being on a sit at editing board, and I'd only really do the problem scenes, like the scenes that weren't working. The other team was, could do the notes on the stuff that was working. But like if something just didn't feel right, it wasn't working, I sit down and I just, trying to get in that flow state and try and dig deep into it. So I've basically done that in all my movies, and so I don't take a credit, but I do edit it.
And what's up ahead for you? Anything that you're developing or
Yeah, I've got a couple things, much more in the indie space than where I was working. The major studios and streamers don't, seem to have moved on from the Raja Gosnell phase of their making phone calls. But I have a couple things going. And if they don't happen, life is great. And if they do happen, it'll be fun. Like I'm fortunate to be in a financial place where I can do things for fun or not do things, or if things happen, great. If they don't, fine. So, it's a pretty damn lucky place to be.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. And I think it's a good idea to at least keep trying and making films and telling stories, not just because that's what you love, but also for the sanity and just keeping busy and
keep the muscles working.
And having a purpose.
Right.
But no, this has been great. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for asking me. Yeah, it's just so fun. It's very fun to go back and talk about the fun movies.
And I if you have time in the near future, would love to chat with you more in detail about Pretty Woman, Good Morning Vietnam, and a bunch of other stuff.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I'll bust out all the good stories.
Great, sounds good. Anything else you want to
add? No, just thank you for this podcast, and thank you for approaching me. And it was fun hearing, the other stories from the other filmmakers that you worked with. And I love the medium, and I'm very happy to be part of it.